What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Foot and Fist Sports Network, where it's time to talk about the fight fallout from UFC 214. And as I was saying in my prediction video, it was going to be a great card from top to bottom, and it did not disappoint, except for a couple of fights that were absolute trash, like Tyron Woodley versus Damian Maia, and to a certain degree, Chris Cyborg versus Tony Evinger. And I'll talk about those two a little bit later on. Right now, I want to start off with Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier. And usually, I talk about the smaller fights first and get into the big ones. But right now, I was so impressed with Jon Jones' performance. I want to start off directly with him. And if you don't know what this show is about, it's where I talk about what's next for each fighter, or at least some of the bigger fighters, and what they should do next in their career. Now, Jon Jones. If there was ever any doubt of who is the greatest of all time, there cannot be any doubt anymore forever. I mean, Jon Jones, he came back after a 2-year layoff, and he absolutely destroyed Daniel Cormier. I think there was very, very few people that expected it to be that big of a beatdown, and to be, not to be bragging or anything like that, but I did expect that to happen. In my predictions, I expected a 4th-round knockout by Jon Jones. It was a 3rd-round knockout, so he did it even better than I expected. But if you look at how the fight was going, it wasn't as easy as it would seem based on the knockout. First round, I thought Jon Jones definitely won the round, but there have been people saying that maybe DC won it, and I can honestly see why. Early on in the round, Daniel Cormier landed a big uppercut that knocked Jon's mouthpiece out. Other than that, there wasn't a whole lot in there for DC for the first 4 minutes. I think Jon Jones definitely dominated the first 4 minutes, and then in that last minute, DC landed a couple shots, but nothing major, nothing to where I could say it stole the round for DC. I personally think that Jon Jones definitely won that first round. The second round was a bit of a different story because it started off the same as the first one. Jon Jones really, controlling the distance and things like that, but then DC started landing some really good shots, and Jon Jones was looking a little bit stiff. He was looking like maybe there was a little bit of ring rust. But DC was definitely landing some good shots. He started taunting Jon Jones a little bit, which I think actually ended up being his downfall. Because in the third round, and like I said, I think the second round was DC. But third round, he came out there. It looked like he sort of abandoned the game plan. Because if you look at the first couple rounds, he was being very, very smart. He wasn't lunging into things. He wasn't leaving himself exposed. He was doing a great job of fighting a calm fight and not playing to Jon's strengths. Third round, he maybe looked like he fell a bit in love with the boxing. It seemed like he was getting a little bit too overconfident in his striking and things like that, and I think that ended up being his downfall. He went in there, he started sort of approaching Jones too much, keeping his hands down as well because he was taunting him a little bit, and then Jon Jones, who was going to the body and to the legs all fight long, faked him out, went to the head, fucked him up, and the most brutal thing about that, I mean, except for the ground and pound, that was absolutely ferocious, and I think Jon Jones, without a doubt, has the most ferocious ground and pound in mixed martial arts, and possibly even ever in mixed martial arts, except for maybe Shogun in his prime, but definitely Jon Jones is way better at ground and pound. But I think that, the biggest thing there was, and it's something that's very, very smart, was the trip. If you see, Jon Jones head kicked him, he faked a bunch of times, looking kind of hilarious, and then he saw that DC was really stumbling backwards, so he tripped him. A lot of times, guys, when they have their opponent like that, they dive in for a takedown, and they risk getting guillotined, or they risk getting caught in a scramble or something like that. And Jon Jones, to really recognize the fact that DC had no footing, because DC's base is wrestling, and because of the fact that based on instincts, that's what happens when you're rocked. You go on instincts, and if he'd have shot in for a takedown, maybe DC would have had a better chance of getting out. But throwing that trip, he really made DC stumble. He fucking flipped backwards and things like that, so he even had a harder time getting his bearings and realizing where he was. At that point on, Jon Jones had absolutely nothing stopping him from just destroying DC, and it really was one of the biggest fucking beatdowns I've ever seen in ground and pound. I mean, it was reminiscent of like Brock Lesnar versus the Korean guy he fought in that first one, but even worse. I mean, that guy was at least covering up. DC had no idea where the hell he was, and Jon Jones just beat the fuck out of him, and really, really was a beatdown. And it was actually pretty sad. I've always been a Jon Jones fan. I've never hid that. Regardless of the mistakes he's made, I was always a big fan of him. Him and Junior Dos Santos are my 2 favorite fighters without a doubt. Always have been and always will be. But I do like DC. There's absolutely no reason to hate DC. He is one of the best guys that we've ever seen in mixed martial arts. He's a great human being. You can just tell he's a very nice guy, and there's really no reason to hate him. So it was really, really sad to see that entire situation where he thought it was an early stoppage. He had no idea what happened. He was really pissed off. Big John McCarthy was pissed off at Dana and things like that. He was pretty much yelling at everybody. Dana had a beat redhead. It was just a very, very sad situation, especially because Joe Rogan made a huge mistake and tried to interview him, and that was just really, really bad. And, I feel bad for DC. I will talk about him and what's next for him in a minute, but I felt really bad for him. And Jon Jones, I think he really showed a lot of class, and it's sort of a Conor McGregor type of thing, where when you win and you destroy somebody, you be really humble, you give him a lot of compliments, and yes, it is a way like to really show that you are a humble man and something like that, and really have a lot of class in victory, but it also means that your opponent really can't come at you, because if DC for some reason goes out there and talks shit about Jon Jones, then Jon Jones becomes the good guy, like 100%, and DC becomes the piece of shit like Ronda Rousey, who didn't accept Jon Jones' apology. So it was a brilliant move by Jon Jones, realistically, if that was what he was thinking. If he was just being a good guy, then hats off to him. But either way, it was just a fucking smart way to go. So at the end of the day, DC, I think he's going to have to take it. And obviously, he's now 0-2 against Jon Jones, so he has to just take it and be done with it. But I think that right now, there's really two big options for Jon Jones. Number one, Brock Lesnar. Obviously, the Brock Lesnar fight is very, very unlikely, just because of the fact that Brock has to go over 6 months of USADA testing. And if you look at Brock Lesnar, I don't think anybody doubts that he takes steroids. I mean, realistically, there's just no doubt. I mean, regardless of whether he was, I guess you could say, relinquished of his suspension to a degree because he got that 1 year suspension. But realistically, I mean, everybody knows Brock Lesnar takes fucking steroids. He always has and always will. It's just you don't get that big if you're not on steroids. No matter how physically gifted you aren't that big and that ripped at that fucking weight if you aren't on steroids, and that's just the way it is. So I think the fight would have to take at least 6 months before it could happen. So maybe like November or the huge December card, maybe that would be possible. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to happen. I think that at least not in this year. Maybe by like July next year or something like that, possibly. But either way, I favor Jon Jones big time in that fight. The only advantage that Brock Lesnar would have in there is size, and honestly, size isn't really that big of a deal. We saw how he did against Cain Velasquez, for example. Cain just basically shrugged him off and beat the fuck out of him. We saw against even Mark Hunt was doing some pretty decent things, but Mark Hunt's biggest problem is that he's got some garbage takedown defense. So it's not really much you can go off of there. I look more at like what happened against Cain, what happened against Overeem, even though Overeem was fucking juiced to the gills. Brock Lesnar is definitely very beatable. He's definitely very beatable. And Jon Jones being the greatest of all time and being the bigger man himself, not like when it comes to weight-wise and not being as thick as Brock, but being the taller man, having the much longer reach, and just being so much more technical in every single aspect of mixed martial arts. I think that Jon Jones would be a huge favorite there, and even with the early odds that have come out from Vegas, he already is like a plus 250, plus 300 favorite, so it makes perfect sense that Jon Jones is going to be by far the big favorite there, and I think that, honestly, that would be a pretty easy win for Jon. I don't think Brock Lesnar is going to be able to take him down. I think Jon Jones would just piece him up, to be honest. And then I think that the fight that really should happen is Jon Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson. Because if you look at what happened with Gustafsson recently, that fight against Glover Teixeira was tremendous. He looked amazing in that fight. And honestly, when it comes to people in that weight class, obviously DC was the guy who a lot of people thought could be the biggest test for him. But if you look at actual performances, Alexander Gustafsson is the only fighter that has really put Jon Jones under a lot of trouble. And based on what everybody's been saying, that was the fight that Jon Jones trained the least for. He trained for like 2 weeks for that fight, and most of the time he was still partying every single night. So it's hard to really say that Gustafsson would do the same thing right now, especially because, if you take away Jon Jones' game plan A, he has a plan B, plan C, plan D, plan fucking E. He has so many things that he can do in his arsenal. So I don't think anybody beats him, but I think that if there is anybody that could possibly beat him, it is Alexander Gustafsson. I think he has the physical gifts so we can at least make it a very tough fight for Jon, and that's the fight that has to happen. That is the next fight. And I'm looking at the rankings right now. There's pretty much Alexander Gustafsson, and there's Volkan Ozdemir. Everybody else, there really isn't a lot of competition for Jon right now. So I would say get those two guys out of the picture, and then maybe move up the heavyweight, fight whoever's the champion. Apparently, he's turned down a fight against Stipe Miocic because of the fact that Miocic is a very dangerous striker. He's a bigger guy. I don't think the bigger guy excuse is kind of valid because of the fact that he wants to fight Brock Lesnar, but I think that he really sees that Brock Lesnar is kind of a trash fighter, so he sees that as a very easy fight. I don't think he wants to fight Stipe because Stipe has great wrestling. He has very, very good hands, and just overall he's a very tough dude. So I don't think that's the fight that Jon Jones wants. I think that if Fabricio Verdum, for example, was the champion, he would take that easily. I think that even if Cain was the champion, because it's just a bigger version of DC, I think he would probably take that pretty fast as well. But I don't think he wants to fight Stipe Miocic right now. Maybe down the line when he's cleaned up his division, maybe. But right now, I don't think Jon wants Stipe Miocic. So, and the rankings right now that I'm looking at the UFC website aren't updated right now. For some reason, DC is still the champion. Jon Jones is still number 1. Jimmy Manuwa is still number 3, 2 positions above Ozdemir. So, just to give you an idea of the fact that it is a little bit off. I do think that Jon Jones should be fighting Gustafsson right now. And then after that, Ozdemir, if he does maybe get one more win, or even if he just waits it out, he definitely is the next guy in line. I think that's going to be, both guys are definitely going to be tremendous fights for John. Now, there's a lot to do. There's a lot for John to have to prove against those two guys. Obviously, John has proven everything he could possibly prove, but what I mean is, like, those are the only two guys that there's really still a chance of really giving him a hard time, because Ozdemir in the clinch is a beast, and John Jones likes to clinch a lot of guys, and John Jones likes to go against guys in their favorite type of positions, basically. So it'll be interesting to see what happens against Ozdemir there, but right now, Alexander Gustafsson, based on his last performance and based on the rivalry that these two guys have and based on how their first fight was one of the best fights of all time, that is the fight to make. Now, talking about DC, I'm going to drink a little bit of water real fast. It's hot as fuck here, and I'm having a hard time talking. Right now, I think that Daniel Cormier definitely needs to either move up to heavyweight or retire. Now, there is talks of possibly, at least I don't know if it's, I think it's official that 225 is also one of the weight classes that have been added, but obviously UFC hasn't adopted that weight class yet. I don't think there's a whole lot of competition in that weight class, so I don't think they're going to be doing it anytime soon. DC, if that was the case, could possibly move up there, but then John Jones could also move up there and take that title too. So I think there's only really one option for DC if he does want to keep on fighting, and that is going up to heavyweight. Cain Velasquez is still one of the top dudes in that weight class, and obviously if he loses against Stipe Miocic, he'll be out of the picture, at least for the time being. In that case, DC could potentially get himself a title shot, because even at heavyweight, he was still one of the most dominant guys there. He beat guys, he dominated Josh Barnett. He was undefeated at heavyweight, so there's really no reason to think that he can't do well at heavyweight. Is he going to be able to beat Stipe Miocic? I don't think so. Could he beat Fabricio Verdum? I definitely think so. So I think that he could be possibly world champion there, depending on what happens with Stipe. There's a lot for him to do there. I think he definitely still has a chance to prolong his career there, especially because if you look at heavyweights, a lot of times they are older fighters. So there's still plenty of time for DC at heavyweight if he wants to continue there. I think that he could definitely do big things there. And if he does move to heavyweight, honestly, I would think that he would, considering he's a former champion of light heavyweight and having only lost to John Jones, which definitely there's absolutely no shame in losing to the greatest of all time. I think he could honestly slot in right into like the number 6 position, and maybe even if he be fighting like Derek Lewis or Mark Hunt, fighting one of those guys to get himself a bit of a lower ranked heavyweight. Get himself to see if he really wants to get a win in, and then see if he wants to keep on going and maybe end his career on a win at heavyweight. Maybe fight, Derek Lewis, Mark Hunt, like I said, and then from there decide if he wants to keep on going. I think that would be a very, very good move for him, especially because Mark Hunt, he's a heavy-handed guy, yes, but he is a short guy. He's DC's height, and he has some takedown problems, so I think the DC would definitely be able to dominate him. I think DC is too smart to really get caught by the bombs by Mark Hunt. Of course, he just got hit by John Jones, but John Jones is just a way better fighter than Mark Hunt. It's not even close. Even on the feet, John Jones, I think, would absolutely destroy Mark Hunt. So I think that DC could definitely beat any of those two guys I just mentioned. Even I would say maybe Dos Santos a bit more of a tough fight, but if you think about it, Cain Velasquez and DC, like I said, are very similar fighters. So if DC fights like Cain, he could beat Junior Dos Santos. I honestly believe so. So I think that DC would easily slot into a top 6 position, but could even be a top 4 heavyweight right now, to be honest with you. So there's plenty of options for him if he wants to continue his career, but personally, I wouldn't find any shame in him retiring. He did a lot in the sport. He's what now? He's he's had 21 fights, I think. He's 19-2, if I'm not mistaken. So he has absolutely no shame in retiring right now. At 39 years old, it would make perfect sense. 38 to 39 years old, it would make perfect sense. He's had such a great career. He's done so much in wrestling and MMA. There's just absolutely nothing for him left to prove. Unless he wants to win a title heavyweight. But even so, I don't think there's anything left for him to prove because he's really done a whole lot, especially in the short time he's been fighting. He hasn't really been fighting for that long, and he's had so many fights and he's done so much. So honestly, having beaten guys like Dan Henderson, having beaten Alexander Gustafsson, having beaten just some absolute monsters out there, Rumble Johnson twice, but he's done so much, and I would honestly give a tribute video to DC if he did retire. So, and I don't do that for a lot of people. So, I have to give hats off to DC for having such a great career and for being such a great role model for everybody. Because regardless, like I said, I'm a John Jones fan, but he has been such a great role model for everybody. I have so much respect for Daniel Cormier. I send him messages on Instagram, send him messages on Xbox Live. He never answers me, but I don't expect him to answer me. I just do it for lulz. And hopefully, now that the whole John Jones beef is done, hopefully we can make a friendship and we could possibly play Xbox Live together, like I've always been hoping to with my man Daniel Cormier. Hopefully he will answer my messages. Let me know in the comment section down below if you have any possible way. Maybe you can get in touch with him and tell him to answer me. If not, I'll just take it up the ass like I always do with DC. And not literally, okay? I've never gotten fucked in the ass, so let's just keep it friendly. So next up, we're going to go ahead and talk about the co-main event, and I'm going to have a little bit of beef with this one because Tyron Woodley, at the end of the fight, or even before that, he was talking about how he was going to light up and then Barao finish it fast and things like that. Damian Maia and finish it fast and go watch the main event. And honestly, yes, he did. He has apparently fucked up his shoulder early on in that fight. But at the end of the day, if you just look at what Damian Maia was doing, Damian Maia wasn't a threat in anything. I mean, Tyron Woodley was just so much better than him, like I predicted in the takedown. And when it comes to takedowns, there was absolutely no threat of him losing that fight. And yes, obviously, if he would have exposed himself a little bit more, there was a possibility of Damian Maia taking him down. But realistically, I just don't think that Damian Maia had any business being in the cage with Tyron Woodley. Damian Maia, I've been saying this for a long time. I don't see how he's possibly able to do what he does, where he just finishes everybody like that. And if you go against a guy who has good wrestling, we've seen what he's incapable of doing anything. He's absolutely shut down. Yes, he only had like 4 weeks to train for it, but he got absolutely shut down. He did absolutely nothing. He landed a few good shots with his left hand, but really nothing that was actually risky for Tyron Woodley. So at the end of the day, Damian Maia, I don't really see what's left for him. Honestly, if he goes to the middleweight, he's going to get fucked up. Maybe if he goes a super welterweight, which is the new weight class once the UFC does put it in, but we have no idea when that's even going to happen, if the UFC is even going to want to have that weight class. So there's really nothing for him there. Honestly, I think that Damian Maia has pretty much done everything he can, especially because of the fact that the UFC, there's no fucking way they're going to give him another title shot after having such two atrocious title fights. Against Anderson Silva was one of the worst title fights of all time. This one was possibly the worst title fight of all time. So, there's just absolutely no way in hell he's going to be getting another title shot, and I think it's end of the line for Maia. I don't see how he could possibly go forward and get another title shot. So maybe he wants to go to Bellator, maybe something like that. He could probably be the middleweight champion in Bellator, but realistically in the UFC, I think he's done. I don't see how he could possibly be a contender at middleweight. I don't think he could possibly be a contender at welterweight. And Maia, really good fighter, just way too limited in his approach. When it comes to fighting the real legit guys like the world champions, you have to be completely good at everything. Carlos Condit, I think, was going to be a guy who could destroy him. And Carlos Condit's always had that problem. Takedown defense is just shit for him. So I think that was his big downfall. I think that if he fights Robbie Lawler, I think Damian Maia gets destroyed. I think we saw against what happened against Roy McDonald. So anybody who has really good takedown defense and even really good jiu-jitsu, I just don't see him being able to beat any of these guys. Like even Thompson, I think that Wonder Boy pieces the fuck out of him. I think, I don't know. I think it's time for him to retire. I think even Donald Cerrone. If Donald Cerrone were to fight Maia, I think that Donald would just destroy him. I think Maia should probably just retire, call it a day. He's had a really successful career. He hasn't won a champion, but I don't think he's ever going to be a champion, at least not in the UFC. So either call it a day or go to Bellator. As for Tyron Woodley, I expected a lot more for him. Obviously, in those Wonderboy Thompson fights, he really didn't show a lot of his game. He was being very defensive. He was being very just reserved because he didn't want to get knocked out. And I can understand that because there was always a risk of him losing that fight against Wonderboy Thompson. But against Damian Maia, man, he looked like absolute shit. He just didn't do anything. And obviously, he did a tremendous job to stop all those takedowns. So it's hard to say they look like shit. But I just think he could have done so much more. And that's what pissed off Dana White. That's why he lost the GSP fight. And overall, I just think that as a world champion, Tyron Woodley, if he really wants to be remembered as a great champion, as one of the best welterweights of all time, he has to start finishing people, and he at least has to be putting on fun fights. Before he was a champion, he had some great fights. He destroyed Robbie Lawler in 48 seconds. He had a fun fight against Roy McDonald. He had a fun fight in just about every fight he had in the UFC. So you can't describe him as a boring fighter. He's just being way too defensive or being way too cautious, I think, right now. Because if you really want to be a huge fighter in the UFC, you have to be taking a lot of risks. This isn't boxing where you're Floyd Mayweather who can make a ton of money just by running around and being an amazing defensive fighter. In the MMA, you really have to be an offensive fighter who takes a lot of risk if you want to be one of the top dudes. So I think that's right now, Tyron Woodley. There's really only one option there, and I think that has to be Robbie Lawler. But he doesn't want to fight Robbie Lawler because of the fact that he just knocked him out and things like that. And we don't know. Tyron Woodley always has a ton of reasons why he shouldn't be fighting a guy, but he ends up fighting him anyway. So at the end of the day, that's the only option there. Jorge Masvidal's coming off a loss, and I think he has a fight booked anyway. Wonderboy Thompson, they aren't going to do that again. Carlos Condit, I would actually be really interested in Carlos Condit fight, but he hasn't fought in forever, so hard to give him that title shot. Donald Cerrone just lost. So the only option really is Robbie Lawler. So that's pretty much it. That's all I'm going to say about this title fight. It was just a very boring fight, nothing really to talk about. Next I'm going to talk about actually Donald Cerrone and Robbie Lawler. Now, I think that's going to be fight of the night. Honestly, this was one of the best fights that you could possibly put together, especially in that welterweight division. And Robbie Lawler really started off like he absolutely did wanted no chance of losing this fight. He started off with a bang. He clinched up with DC with Donald Cerrone and started beating the fuck out of him. And it was actually kind of reminiscent of that Eddie Alvarez fight. Only difference is obviously Robbie Lawler has so much more power and he's just such more of a ferocious fighter. It looked like Donald Cerrone was going to be in for a classic Donald Cerrone moment where he gets finished early on in the first round because he starts off too slow. But luckily for him, he was able to keep himself composed, and it looks like at welterweight he has a bit of a better damage, I guess you could say. He's able to take more damage. So in that fight, he was able to really resist, and he was able to stay in the fight, and he did a great job, especially in the second round. It looked like Robbie Lawler maybe was taking the round off a little bit. Maybe he was feeling the fatigue a little bit, and Donald Cerrone really turned it on. I think it was a round apiece going into the third one, and I think that Robbie Lawler just sort of... I don't think he dominated the round, but I think he definitely did enough to win the round. So at the end of the day, I'm not mad at the decision. It could have really gone either way because I've seen a lot of people talk about how they think Donald Cerrone win. I don't think that's a bad thing to say. I don't think that's like out too far fetched. But at the end of the day, I think that right now Robbie Lawler definitely deserved the win, and I think that he's pretty much, like I said, the only option to fight Tyron Woodley for that title. As for Donald Cerrone, there's plenty of options for him. Does he want to fight a guy like Masvidal? Again, I don't think that's really an option because I think that Masvidal just knocked him out. I would honestly like to see Wonderboy Thompson versus Donald Cerrone. I think that would be one hell of a fucking fight. If you think about it, both guys are really good strikers. Wonderboy Thompson is a guy who, obviously being so long and things like that, he's very dangerous. So I think that he would have a very fun fight against Donald Cerrone because I think they matchup-wise, they would fit very, very well. Donald Cerrone, you have to clinch him up and do things like that. That would probably be his best game plan. But I think it would be a very fun fight. I think that's probably the best option for Cerrone at welterweight because if you look at the guys that he's lost to, he's only lost to Robbie and now he's lost to Masvidal. Well, he's lost to Robbie before he lost to Masvidal. So two guys that are elite fighters in that weight class. And if he wants to go down to lightweight, I personally don't think there's any reason for him to go down there because of how much of a pileup there is because of Conor fighting Floyd. So there's really nothing there. I think that probably, like I said, Wonderboy Thompson would be a great chance for him to fight. And even if Damian Maia just want one more fight, maybe fight Cowboy. Cowboy versus Thompson or Maia would be very, very interesting. I think that Cowboy would probably piece up Damian Maia. I think it'd be a pretty easy fight for him because I don't think Maia takes him down. I don't think Maia submits him. So I think that Donald Cerrone would just piece him up on the feet. And I think Donald Cerrone is a guy that takes way more risks. So I honestly think that Cerrone would probably finish him in the first round. Second round, I think it'd be definitely finished for Donald Cerrone. Whereas against Wonderboy Thompson, I think we go to a decision. But I think it'd be a very, very, very interesting fight. And the winner would definitely be in line for a title fight, especially depending on what happens with Tyron Woodley. If Wonderboy were to beat Cerrone, would he really be able to get another title shot at Woodley if he's still the champ? Probably not. But I think Cerrone versus Woodley would be one hell of a fight. There's just so much for Donald Cerrone. Like in this weight class, he really hasn't fought anybody other than Lawler, Masvidal, and the guys already beaten. So there's just so much there for him. And I look forward to seeing what happens with Cowboy Cerrone. Now I want to talk a little bit about Cyborg. And I'm not going to talk about Tonya Evinger because I don't really care about her. Honestly, I think that her game, the only thing that she has is toughness. And yes, she's able to move. She was able to dodge a lot of shots from Cyborg, and I was actually pretty impressed by that. But realistically, there's just no reason to talk about her in any real praising light. There's just no reason to praise her. I don't think that she did anything in that fight that really showed that she's on the championship level, whether it be women's bantamweight, women's featherweight, or women's, honestly, strawweight. I just don't think that's anything for her there. I think she gets destroyed by Amanda Nunes. So realistically, she could probably just leave the UFC as it is and not really. I don't think there'll be any complaints from anybody. So yeah, just talk about Cyborg. Cyborg, she did very well in this fight. She did everything right. She was very calm. She didn't leave herself exposed because Tonya Evinger, as a grappler, is still dangerous. But I think that Cyborg was just physically way too powerful. Striking wise, she was just way too dominant. I mean, she rocked her with the first jab basically. And in the clinch, she was just way too good. So I think that honestly, she could have finished that fight at any time. She could have finished that fight even in the first round. Yes, Evinger was a very tough chick, but I just don't think that she had anything to really be able to survive for very, very long. You know what I mean? I think that Cyborg, if she'd have just been a bit more aggressive, could have finished that fight even in the first round. So I'm happy for Cyborg for winning the fight. I think she could have done more, though. That's my only beef with there. But right now, what's the next for her? I mean, if you look at the women's featherweight division, there's really nothing there. Durand May doesn't want to fight her because she's a bitch. She's a bitch is in the fact that she's running from Chris Cyborg. And then if you look at, I guess, Holly Holm, who probably should have won that fight in the first place against GDR, is the only option. And Cyborg wants to fight. It looks like Holly Holm wants to fight, possibly. So make that fight happen. That's pretty much the only thing I could think of that could possibly be, that could possibly make a lot of sense. So even then, though, I think Cyborg wins. But it would be a bit of an interesting fight because of Holly Holm's striking background. But if you look at her fights in the UFC, there hasn't been really other than that Ronda Rousey fight, there hasn't been one fight where I've been like, wow, this chick is fucking tremendous, you know? So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I mean, she lost to Valentina Shevchenko, who's a tiny chick with not a whole lot of power. Obviously, very technical when it comes to striking, but will she beat Cyborg? I just don't think so. But it really is the only fight that makes sense for that women's featherweight championship. So let me know in the comment section down below who you want to see Cyborg fight. Last but not least, we have the opener for that fight, and that was Volkan Ozdemir versus Jimmy Manuwa. And I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked to see what happened there because Jimmy Manuwa, he's a guy who has monstrous power, and he always puts on some fun fights. For him to lose in, what was it, like 40 seconds, maybe even less, was shocking. I mean, Volkan Ozdemir, I knew who he was coming in this fight, and I had been impressed with him in some of his previous fights. But if you look at even Luke Thomas, he didn't really give him a great chance against Jimmy Manuwa. And honestly, I thought it was going to end. I can't remember if I picked it the first or second round. I thought Jimmy Manuwa was going to win this fight. But Ozdemir was just fucking ferocious in that clinch. He was against the cage too, which was shocking. The fact that Jimmy Manuwa was pushing him up against the cage, and with such a short shot, he was able to absolutely put Manuwa to sleep. So he has so much power there. You can tell this guy has so much upside. He is probably the most promising prospect in this weight class, and he's one of the most promising prospects in UFC and in MMA in general. I think he has so much to do. I think he has a ton that he could do in this weight class. Unfortunately for him, just like unfortunately for just about everybody else, like even Alexander Gustafsson, he's in the Jon Jones era. Can he beat Alexander Gustafsson? Can he beat Jon Jones? We'll find out. Can he even beat Daniel Cormier? I think that would be a very interesting fight as well, but I think DC needs to just move up to heavyweight and be done with it. So Ozdemir versus Gustafsson, if the Jon Jones fight takes a bit more time to set up, and either that or if Gustafsson for some reason can't take the Jon Jones fight, then slide in Ozdemir. I think that really those are the two options for him. Just what a beast. Maybe even Glover Teixeira, but honestly, Glover's coming off of a bad loss to Gustafsson. So I would say throw Ozdemir against a guy like that, either Gustafsson or Jon Jones. Those are the two options for him. Either way, Ozdemir has so much potential. He is definitely a dangerous guy there. I think he could definitely give Gustafsson and Jones a run for their money just based on his power. I think obviously Jon lights him up, and I honestly think Gustafsson probably beats him too, but you never fucking know. This guy's a Terminator. Like I said in the last video, which was my prediction video, he is a Terminator. He's a fucking Swiss Terminator. He looks like a fucking Russian. He is a monster. So there's a whole lot for this guy to do. I look forward to see what he can do in his next fights. And guys, there's so much to look forward to in the UFC right now, especially in this weight class. I think there's not a whole lot of depth there, but there is some fucking great stuff coming with Jon Jones being back at the top. So let me know in the comment section down below who you want to see each of these fighters take on. Is there anybody in particular you want to see Jon Jones fight? Then let me know. Brock Lesnar or Alexander Gustafsson? Which one do you want to see most? As for the rest of the fighters, is there anything in particular that really interests you? Do you agree with my decisions? Or at least my picks for the next opponents? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you liked the video, please hit that like button. Please share it with anybody that you think could possibly be interested. Any forums, Facebook, whatever you want to share it on, I'd be extremely grateful. And thank you so much, guys. Soon, I'm probably going to be starting a Patreon. I've been having some people telling me that I should be starting a Patreon just so I can possibly get in some money to build up some things. I do want a green screen. I want a few things to really improve this channel. And, no money comes in. I have very small views. I'm a very small channel. So it's obviously very difficult to invest money into something like that. So if you guys are interested in that, let me know in the comment section down below. And I would be very thankful to anybody who would help me with this small channel grow and start a community. It is growing very slowly, but it's still growing. Up to 63 subscribers as of right now. Like a couple months ago, it was up to 50. So it is starting to improve, and things are still starting to get better. And hopefully, you guys will join the community. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I will see you in the next video, which will probably come out very, very soon. If you're interested in football stuff and MMA, there's always going to be some content for you, and I will be coming in the 12th. I've moved back to my old place, so I'll be having a lot more flexibility with my timing, and I'll be able to do a lot more videos and that stuff will be coming out much more frequently. So once again, guys, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Peace.